radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network.
Good evening. How you doing? Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Today is Tuesday. No, today is Wednesday, Tuesday. Today's Tuesday, September 5th. I forgot what day it was. Yesterday was Labor Day, right? Or Labor Day weekend. It is 2023, though. Let's do this, man. Very excited about the show tonight. Our guest, Dr. Gregory Little. I've titled the show Atlantis, but we're going to go in a lot of different directions tonight. But we're going to focus on Atlantis, and I want you to help support our show and everything that we do here by getting your new Fade to Black t-shirts. The links are below. Everything is autographed. It includes free shipping. We have 2 shirts. That's right. We have the original, and we have the new Michael Oeming hand-drawn, penned official Fade or Not shirt. And you can get those by the links below. Let's get straight to it. We are going to discuss all of the compelling science tonight that will back up the impressive evidence of Atlantis. And we're going to share the astonishing readings and life of the world's most prolific psychic and seer, Edgar Cayce. All right, we're going to do that and a whole lot more. He has been featured in 14 documentaries on the History Channel. He is co-author of over, are you ready, 60 books. I haven't written one. 60 books. He has been on History Channel, Discovery, Learning Channel, National Geographic, and many other networks. Of course, he has been on Coast to Coast as well. And he also is the author or co-author of 7 books about Cayce's abilities. His links are below, and I would like to welcome for the first time to Fade to Black, the one and only. He's right here. He's right with us, Dr. Gregory Little. Greg, good evening, young man. How you doing?
Good evening to you. Thank you for calling me a young man. I very much appreciate it, though it's not true, but I accept it. Thanks a lot. It's good to be here. Good to meet you too.
Yeah. The honor is mine. And you know what, though? Okay, first I've got to get the first-time guest disclaimer out of the way, which I didn't think I had to do because I thought you were on the show before. And we were talking about this earlier. My memory, obviously, is not what it used to be. And you said, no. So now we have to do the first-time guest disclaimer, which is this. It's Greg, it's just you and I sitting on my couch having a conversation as friends. And where that conversation starts, it starts. Where it ends. But we're going to end as friends. There you go. You have to accept, though.
I accept.
Yeah, see.
Although you're not on my couch. I'm looking there. Well, I'm on yours. That's right.
That's right. You're on my couch. Now, we were talking earlier about age and memory, but one of the other things we were talking about was Memphis, where you live now. And after we talked, I remembered one thing about Memphis, and I just wanted to share this with you, that if there's one takeaway that I have about Memphis is I was intimidated by the level of musicians in Memphis. It is at a whole nother level. And my first night there, I was in Hollywood experiencing the Los Angeles music scene. So I thought that I knew it all, right? Seen it all, been there, done that. I go to Memphis, and my parents were living there. And I go down, a neighbor takes me down to Beale Street, and we go to my future employer. We go to the Omni New Daisy, going to see 4 bands. 1, 2, 3, 4, better than the last band. And the first band, I thought, it just blew. I thought, what's going on here? Memphis, right? And that's and you could go into any bar, up and down Beale Street and see like the best thing you've ever seen in your life. And you could do that like every night of the week. And Nashville is the same way. And and Memphis is just a music town, and they take it very, very serious. And that's like my memory of Memphis, was being intimidated by all the great musicians. And
back in the 60s, when I moved to Memphis in the 60s, there were garage bands all over the place. You remember the Gentrys and Jimmy Hart, who's a wrestling, he's best known as a wrestling manager. Well, he's the lead singer of the Gentrys. They did Keep on Dancing was their big song and so on. But every place had garage band. And I was in a garage band for a couple years when I first started college at what was then Memphis State. I was in a garage band, and we were good. We were actually good. But they were everywhere. Everybody had a garage band, and that was Memphis then. And it stayed that way through the 70s and 80s. And of course, now Memphis is probably one of the main focal points for its particular kind of hip hop or rap music. It's
so true,
man.
It's so true. And you think about the history of, Stax Records and
Sun Studios.
Sun Studios, of course, Elvis, that goes without saying. And how do I want to say, to get into a band, the other musicians are already great, right? And if you're going to go, your competition level is it is gnarly, man. You have to be really, really great, not good. You have to be really, really great, and that's Memphis, and very proud of my time there. And so I was just continuing our conversation from earlier. I actually want to start here, though. When I was a kid, I've told the story a lot on the air, but I'll share this with you. When I was a kid, now I'm talking about 5 years old, 6 years old, 7 years old. My mom, who's no longer with us, but my mom was out of her mind in an awesome way. She was really cool. And so if I was 5, she would have been at that age. She was probably 26, 27 years old, about that age. Just a kid, a baby, raising a family, thinking about it. But the house, so we had a bookshelf, bookcase in the living room that was full of Edgar Cayce. And when I first learned to read, right, you're at that age and you can finally like read stuff. I was like, Edgar Cayce. There's hundreds of Edgar Cayce books, right? They were just lined up. Edgar, who is this guy? Who is it? And that was like my introduction into the world, was what my mom was into and things, and Edgar Cayce. So I followed Edward. So many people have this same story. I'm not planting a flag here, right? It's not an original story, but it's my part of my journey. And as I got into this, and at a very young age, it taught me that the world is not what it seems. And that's really the truth. And Edgar influenced many, many people, including my mom and myself. How many times do you hear this story, right? I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not the only one, am I?
No, I'll tell you a story. For roughly from 1999 to 2013, I was very involved with the headquarters of the Cayce Organization, which is called the ARE, Association for Research and Enlightenment, in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And my wife was on the board of trustees and was actually chairperson of the board for quite a few years. But I helped with what's called the Ancient Mysteries Conference, because my wife and I were heading the ARE Search for Atlantis project. We were also editing an Ancient Mysteries newsletter that they put out, and writing all these books, really researching what Cayce said, trying to see if there was truth or falsehood in it. And everything he said is not true. I want to say that right now. I'm not going to say here that everything Edgar Cayce said is true, because that's not true. But anyway, at one of the people that we got, I knew was an archaeologist to come speak. And I knew a lot of archaeologists, some of which I was very friendly with, mainly secretively, because there is a cadre of archaeologists that are kind of behind the scenes and underground, who believe that an ancient civilization did occur before the last ice age ended. For lack of a better term, it's Atlantis, but they can't come out in the open and say it. Well, we had an archaeologist who was a skeptic that I brought in to be a speaker at the Ancient Mysteries Conference. And in that talk, he began with something that I had no idea about. It's the same story as yours. He said when he grew up, his mother had Cayce books all over the place. She went to Cayce study groups, which still go on to this day. And he was very influenced by it. And he also admitted in that talk that, okay, I do believe that there was a civilization that did exist before the end of the last ice age. It was probably destroyed, or the main portion of it was probably destroyed. But that was a skeptical archaeologist. So I've heard that story from dozens and dozens and dozens of people over the years. I couldn't possibly say how many, probably 100, maybe more, because I know thousands of ARE members. And in all the years that I've done this, I've interacted with thousands of people at conferences and talks, which I'm trying not to do so many of now. But that's a very typical story.
The other part about this, I'm going to Egypt next month in a few weeks. It seems like I just got back. It was last October. I was last there, and going around the Sphinx, which we had access. You can't. There's a perimeter up on top. That's where the tourists have to stop. You can't go down into the Sphinx chamber. We had access to that, and I walked around the circumference and shot a video by myself. And I came around the back paw. If you're facing the Sphinx, this would be on the right side. If you're facing the face. But when you're around the back and you're facing the back of, where with its tail that comes down and its paws are right there, it would be the left paw, the left rear paw. So there's a frigging tunnel.
Yeah.
And I see it, and I go up to it, and I pull the cover back, and I shot the video, and I took a peek down, and I said, wait a minute. Okay, now either there are tunnels underneath the Great Sphinx or there are not, right? And the Egyptologists will tell you there's nothing to see here. And I'm like, I'm looking at it, right? I'm looking at a tunnel. And there were two tunnels, one that went straight down and another one that came off of that tunnel. I could, I didn't want to go down. I didn't want to get arrested.
Right.
But when you hear stuff like that, going back to your point about archaeologists, you can't, Dr. Robert Schoch, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I was hosting a panel, and this is what he said, exactly to your point, and going back to the Great Sphinx, of course. He says, there used to be an A word you couldn't say in school. He's a professor, at Boston University. And that was aliens. He goes, but I can use that word today. I can say aliens. I can talk about ET. But the other A word you can't say is Atlantis.
Yeah.
And that's
absolutely.
coming from Robert Schoch. And that's addressing your point. I just don't get it. Why is it that we want to stop our history and quest for knowledge at 3000 BC, when there's obviously something that went on before that?
There's a lot of psychology involved in that. It's actually pretty deep, but a lot of these professionals have taught for 30, 40, 50 years. And if you write the textbooks and you say certain things in them, and you've taught this same class for 50 years and you've said the same thing over and over. I can give you examples of absolute lies that are in textbooks about Edgar Cayce. And I've contacted the people that wrote the textbooks. A couple of them actually changed their textbooks. Others said, no, you're wrong. You don't know what you're talking about. So that's another story in this, but there's a lot of psychology involved in it, a lot of ego. And once people get entrenched in a belief system, they invest too much of their own ego and pride and all that into it. And that's just the way it is. I don't think that will change. I will say that I have seen that tunnel also. And did you know that Zahi Hawass and Mark Lerner both have close connections to the ARE? Mark Lerner was an ARE member for many years, taught there for many years, and Zahi Hawass worked at the ARE a while. And in books, various books by Edgar Cayce's oldest son talk about the ARE getting Zahi Hawass into the University of Pennsylvania's doctoral program in archaeology. And I was, when I was at the ARE virtually every year at these conferences, Zahi Hawass came and talked routinely. And Zahi comes and talks routinely to ARE tour groups. So there's just a lot under the surface here people don't know about. There are tons of stories I can tell you that are absolutely bizarre in this. Let me go ahead and tell you one that's just totally off. It made us bizarre. So Edgar Cayce said there were Hall of Records. That's what everybody's looking for at the Sphinx. It's a chamber that's supposedly under the Sphinx. And the Hall of Records contains the history of Atlantis and a lot of artifacts from Atlantis. It's supposedly in a large chamber beneath the Sphinx. Cayce gave real specific instructions about it. The first ARE members actually went there in the 1950s. This was two women, and they were given permission in the 1950s to put a drill hole down in looking for it, and they hit water. They hit the water level. That was the start of the search for the Hall of Records. But Cayce also said there were two other Hall of Records. One of them is in a place called Piedras Negras, Guatemala, and the other one is famous. It's in near Bimini in the Bahamas. And of course, Cayce gave a specific sort of a prediction. He said that a portion of Atlantis will rise again near Bimini in 1968 or 69. And he added, that's not so far away. And he said that in the late 1930s is when he said that. So in 1968, some things were discovered, and one of them was called the Bimini Road, which is a large underwater formation. It's a J-shaped formation made out of stones. Well, for up till today, starting in, I believe it was 71 when the first skeptical article came out about it, they said it's natural beach rock, which it is. All rock is natural. And they said that it formed in place. So the whole idea of formed in place, there was a geologist with the U.S. Geological Survey who went over and who core sampled and said that all of them tilt toward deep water, which would prove that these are natural and formed in place, that they weren't anything. Well, he has published that and said it for years, that they all tilted toward the deep water. But if you get his actual article that he wrote, which he won't send to you, which I had to go into the University of Florida archives to pull it out, that's not true. Less than 1/3 of them tilted toward deep water. Now, that's technical. I don't want to explain all that, but here's the kicker. This is the weird part. That same guy with the U.S. Geological Survey in the U.S. Geological Survey laboratories in Miami, Florida, with the full knowledge of his colleagues and the knowledge of people at several universities, geological departments at universities, PhD level geological departments. He fabricated fake artifacts, fake archaeological artifacts, took them to Bimini and planted them around the stones in the hopes that someone would discover them. Now, if that was done today, if one of us went and planted fake artifacts anywhere around the country, say at an Indian mound site or anywhere else, what would they say about us? Now, here's the thing. They know about it today.
Right.
And I know you've never heard this, have you? I'm saying it because it's absolutely true, and I have him on film admitting to it.
I've heard the rumors about this over the years.
It's not a rumor.
Right. And here's the for me when it comes to Bemini, there is something that predates all of that, including Edgar Cayce. And Edgar didn't know anything about this when he made these statements in the 30s about Bemini, which is this. It's the Perry Reese map.
Yeah.
And when you look at the Perry Reese map and you look at the east coast of the United States, which obviously wasn't supposed to have been discovered yet, but there it is. And you see this island off the coast of Florida, which could be Bemini, but on the island across the top of it looks like the Bemini Road. And it's the only island that has this kind of depiction on it. And what was it that those map makers saw? Those cartographers, the knowledge that was handed to them to depict this island in the Caribbean, which looks like it looks like a sidewalk, right? It's blocks, right? And it goes up. And that right there is kind of I don't want to say it's empirical evidence, right? It's nothing that I could present in court. But I got to say, that's a strange thing to be on an island in the Caribbean on a map that was drawn in 1300.
Yeah. Well, we believe that it was, and as Graham Hancock does, which I'm in contact with him and his people in this, but we believe that it was a breakwater or a key, spelled Quay. The Brits, they spell quay, they pronounce it key, but we believe it was a breakwater. And that formed a harbor, and it's been carbon dated, which you can carbon date that kind of rock. People always say, oh, you can't carbon date rock. You can carbon date carbonate rock, which is done really often. The problem with it is the carbon dating that was done by the U.S. Geological Survey guy, the same guy who performed the hoax with the fake artifacts over there. He took huge amounts of it and ground it down. So it was a mixture of a lot of stuff. It was not small pieces that he pulled out from the core. And it's all very complicated. But we believe it was a harbor, started around the year 5000 BC or so, when it was used, when the sea levels were still lower. In 10,000 BC, it's very well known where the sea levels were. In fact, if you scuba dive off of Bimini, or really off of Florida, you can see the sea levels, the shorelines for various time periods, like 10,000 BC. At 10,000 BC, it was roughly 115 feet lower. That's where it was. And along the coast of Bimini, about 5 miles off of Bimini, is where you hit this 10,000 BC shoreline. And that shoreline, by the way, was found by Florida State University's underwater archaeology department. But along that shoreline are roughly 70 square and rectangular structures on the bottom in 3 rows, almost as if these were building foundations that were put there for cargo right along the shoreline. And that is what we believe. There's an episode on the History Channel in the series Mystery Quest that actually shows some good high definition quality shots, video of these structures. And they all look like they are stone, made out of stone. But of course, obviously the roofs and everything else have collapsed. They're filled with sand, pure white sand between these structures. But when you go over them, you go from one, then there's white sand, then another one of these square rectangular structures. They're all 10, 15 feet by 20 feet, about the size of a building. And then you go to another. There's roughly 70 of these in 3 perfect lines with nothing between them. So that's one piece of evidence that is kind of covered up. We can't do anything with it. We did scuba dive it, which is about the maximum depth that a diver like me, a recreational diver, can do. We went down to 115 feet, and that's it, which was actually pretty dangerous. Also, south of Bimini, about 30 miles south, there is literally a stone temple on the bottom, a collapsed stone building made out of polished schist, green schist. The schist either comes from Greece or Norway. There's fluted columns there. It's in a high area. It's about 20 feet underwater, but it's in a high area. When we first discovered it, which we didn't really discover it, we have friends who are Bahamians who found it for us. They had never seen it before. We reported it to the Bahamas, and it's now an official archaeological site, which stops anybody from going and looking at it. But it's amazing. It's an amazing structure, which Edgar Cayce said there was a temple of the Poseidians that if you followed the Gulf Stream to the south, that's where it was. And he said it's under the slime of ages. That was one of his readings about it.
I've been to Atlantis. As a matter of fact, I bought this shirt there.
Yes. And when we started doing 11 years of trips down there to Andros Island and Bimini, we took some trips into the Yucatan. Representatives from the Atlantis resort contacted us because we had gotten a lot of publicity about a discovery off of Andros Island, which is the largest of the Bahama Islands. It's about 50 miles from Nassau and about 100 miles from Bimini. But we found an underwater structure there that looked like a harbor, gigantic stone blocks, 3 layers of them. And that's where we went with the History Channel and National Geographic and others. But they wanted us to work with them to try and develop a way for people to come from Nassau, the Atlantis resort, over and look at that and then take them on kind of an Atlantis cruise.
I would love to do that. I would love to see it. Now, by the way, the Atlantis resort, man, it's amazing. And when you go around, we're going to swing this back directly to Atlantis, everybody. But what's amazing about that resort, and I realize, what it is. It's a tourist destination, but they've got all of the symbolism going on there, right? They have the Mayan influences, they have the Incan influences, they have Egyptian. There's all of these. It's a mix of stuff, but you get to, as a tourist staying there, you get to have exposure to all of these different mythological situations, and it's just amazing. Now, Edgar's version of Atlantis. Let's start there because you know it so well. And the second part of that, as you get started on this, did he have knowledge and exposure to Plato and his version of Atlantis, and also some of the Egyptian hieroglyphs and stories about the origins of Egypt?
I'm sure Edgar did. And the early newspaper reports, like 1910 is when newspaper reports came out about him. They called him an illiterate man. Illiterate man becomes doctor under hypnosis. That was actually the title of an article in the New York Times, but it wasn't true. Edgar did have like an 8th or 9th grade education. That's true. But he was he looked at a lot of books, a voracious reader. He read the Bible once every year of his life, all the way through, which I got to give him credit for that. I haven't done that. I probably won't either. But he worked in bookstores. That's another thing. He worked in bookstores a couple years. There is the story that Edgar could sleep on a book and would absorb and know everything in the book. I've got a different explanation for that, which those are kind of the mythology that has grown about Edgar Cayce. But yes, he had exposure to those things. I am sure that Edgar leafed through a lot of books by the Bureau of Ethnology, by Ignatius Donnelly. I'm sure that he looked at a lot of the books on Plato and read a lot of that. He certainly read the newspaper a lot, almost every day from cover to cover. And back then, the newspapers had a lot more information in them than they do today. But yes, he had exposure to all that. Did that influence him? Some people would say no. Some people say it's all psychic, that he pulled it from the Akashic record or somewhere. I do believe that he did have access to knowledge that most people don't have access to. In fact, he said every idea, every belief, every action by every human and living thing creates vibrations, and those vibrations go into the universe. And the example he gave is that they're like the grooves in a record, which when he said it, records were vinyl and they had grooves in them. Some people may not know this. And the grooves are little vibrational patterns. And it is true that we create electromagnetic waves. And a lot of people, they get weaker and weaker the further away they get from us, but they never go away. They just keep going. And that is what Edgar said that he was accessing. And when I say Edgar said it, that's what he said when he was under his self-induced hypnosis, which he couldn't remember anything that he said when he was in this hypnotic trance. That's why they hired a stenographer to write down every word. He wanted to know what he said in case he said something that was biblically wrong. Because he said many times, if this hurts anybody or if it is not within the morals and beliefs of the Christian church, he wasn't going to do it anymore. So he needed a stenographer. So yeah, he had access.
That's a very interesting idea put forward by Edgar about everything being recorded, right? And
yes.
And the George Van Tassel. Now you know George, right?
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah.
So George said once, it was you can find the video online. It was done in the early 1960s with a TV presenter from Scotland, right? I don't know who it would be. He had a Scottish accent. Yeah. Anyway, George tells him that he built a time machine recording device in Santa Monica, California. And he talks about it in this interview. And this is what he says. He says, everything is recorded. It stays out there. And this machine that I have built, he said, with instructions from, E.T., I can go back 7 years and see anything. It's been recorded. I can watch it on a TV screen. And I just thought, what an interesting. Now, he couldn't go beyond 7 years and he couldn't see into the future, but he could go backwards 7 years where everything is recorded. And he said, everything stays. Everything is recorded in the universe. Very interesting that George would say something very similar to Edgar Cayce.
Well, consider that. You remember the movie Contact, where we started getting a message and then they put the message together and it was Hitler. And it was from the very first television broadcast ever. And it was Hitler introducing the Olympics. And that was in the movie Contact. So, all right. So all the radio signals that have ever been done or TV signals, if they go out in an antenna, they're going out and they just go forever. They will never stop. And our bodies produce electromagnetic fields all the time. I mean, we do. A lot of the work that I've done with Native American rituals and so on, and how to align yourself to that, relates to electromagnetic fields. And the Earth, of course, has an ambient field. But I'm sure that it is true that every action, belief, every cellular action we have in our brain, it goes out there, which would mean it's recorded. Now, the idea of being able to access that recording is another story. Edgar
Right.
said anybody can do that. You may not know this. Thomas Edison actually was in contact with Edgar Cayce and got advice from Cayce when Edison was trying to make a device to contact the dead. You probably don't know that.
No, I did.
Well, I
no,
mean,
now you're making stuff up. Not right.
No, that's actually true. Tesla.
Is that true?
Yes, that is absolutely true. Tesla contacted Cayce. Here's another weird one. The guy that founded Alcoholics Anonymous, the main guy, Bill Wilson, exchanged letters with Edgar Cayce frequently, back and forth. Edgar Cayce also did readings for Woodrow Wilson when he was president. And it was about what Wilson wanted to know was what was going to happen with the League of Nations. I mean, there's tons of these stories about all these famous people. The guy that started Goodyear, the people that started it, I have to look up some of this. George Gershwin was an example. Ernest Hemingway's mother. Gosh, what the heck was his name? I'm looking at a long list here. I can't even come up with them anymore. George Putnam, who was Amelia Earhart's husband.
Mm-hmm.
Putnam got readings from Cayce to try and find Amelia Earhart. And the case, see, all this has only been released in the past few years because these people, all the readings were done anonymously. They kept numbers on the readings, but the people that got the readings stayed anonymous until they died and enough of their relatives had passed on. Cayce actually said that Amelia Earhart survived the crash. Her navigator did not, and she was on an island and she had been hurt. And over the course of about a week, eventually he told Putnam, one of the readings told Putnam that, well, now she's dead. And he gave him the basic location of the island out in the Pacific. Nelson Rockefeller got readings from Edgar Cayce. Gloria Swanson got them. George Meany, who's very well known in union organizing, Meany got them. I mean, there's so many. The guy that founded NBC, David Sarnoff, got readings from Cayce. There's just tons of these stories, all of which are true now. They're all documented. The ARE actually has a museologist, which is a master's level museum person. And they have all of these old letters and files in a safe, in a large safe room that is kept at particular temperatures and so on, because all this stuff is there. And it's only been released in probably the past 10 years or so. But of course, skeptics don't care about any of that, and they don't follow up on any of it. It's like the Lusitania. Cayce did a reading on the Lusitania. A guy was trying to find it. Cayce did a reading. In fact, the guy's name, it was the guy that actually found it. Captain John Craig was his name. He wanted to know where it was. So Cayce told him, okay, this is not a awake Cayce. This is while he is in this trance. So he gave him the location of it. It turned out this captain went to the location, and he's the guy that discovered the Lusitania. But in the reading, Cayce told him it was only hit with one torpedo, not two. And all the reports up to that time had been that it had been hit with two torpedoes. And well, when they found the Lusitania, they found it had been hit with just one torpedo. And of course, all this stuff you just don't hear about. Skeptics will tell you what they call his failed readings. Cayce predicted California would fall into the ocean, and they usually say 1998. No, he didn't. Cayce didn't say that was going to happen in 1998. What Cayce said about his predictions was that if things don't change, here is what will probably happen. And as far as the 1998 thing goes, he did talk about water and so on. And he said that there were factors at play and things would begin in 1998, which very well could lead to California falling in the ocean and a part of Japan being inundated if things didn't change. What does that mean? I don't know. I mean, some people say it was the Fukushima thing and the tsunami and all that. I don't know. But Cayce also said that he was fallible, that a lot of this doesn't come true. It is true that he gave two very specific readings to stockbrokers and to people that had a lot of stock the year before 1929 and in 1929 telling people, get your money out of the stock market. That is true. There are a lot of other of these things that he said that were quite specific, but anything that had to do with finding gold, anything that had to do with finding oil, and gold coins. There are these readings about gold coins, and none of them worked out. And they often did readings to find out why. And he said it's about motives. But when Cayce started, this is how I got into the whole thing to begin with. I was interested as a psychologist in Cayce's health readings and why in the world these health readings were considered to be accurate. That's how I got into this. And in the late 1970s, I started looking into it because it was in psychology books. They talked about this guy, but they only talked about his health readings. And so that's how I got into this. And I do know that when he started out, Cayce had an interaction with a being in a ball of light, which everybody interprets as an angel. And Edgar himself said it was probably an angel. He was 13 years old when the first time happened. He had two of these interactions. And the angel told him that he was going to help people, especially the sick. That is what the angel told him. Before he really got into doing this, now he was 13 then. He didn't tell anybody about that. He told his mother 3 years later. He finally got the courage to tell his mother this 3 years later. Now, the reason a lot of this happened is because when he was 3 years old, Cayce fell on a fence post and stuck a nail in the back of his head. His family pulled it out. They dumped turpentine down the hole, which was the only antiseptic that they had. Later readings by Cayce said that people that have weird accidents, particularly to the head or to the spine, often develop psychic ability. That is one of the things that his readings said.
It wasn't the nail.
Well, I know.
The turpentine. It was the turpentine.
The turpentine. Yeah. I don't recommend anybody to do that. I'm just telling you the story. This is all documented in the Cayce stuff. When he was 4, he was very close to his grandfather, and he was already being called old man. As a 4-year-old, they called him old man because he acted like an old man. He was after this nail hit him, he started seeing little people, little tiny beings. He was in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, near Hopkinsville. You know about another case there, the Kelly Hopkinsville UFO case of all the little people?
Yep.
Very close to the Cayce farm is where that took place. But when he was 4, he saw his grandfather fall off of a horse, bang his head, and his grandfather fell face first into a large puddle of water, and he drowned. Cayce saw his grandfather's ghost from there on and talked to him frequently, along with these little people and so on. But it was when he was 13 that he saw the angel. So, I mean, all these years in between, he saw these little beings.
Yeah, let's stop right there for a second. Right. He says angel, right?
Yes. He said it was an angel, yeah.
The Bible and different cultures around the world and the voices from heaven and angels and gods, demigods and so forth. I've often wondered, and I think that things are starting to lean in this direction, that they call them angels then, or gods, but I think there's a possibility of something interdimensional and maybe extraterrestrial here. Did Edgar ever have that consideration?
Well, he did talk a little bit about aliens visiting and life elsewhere. I'll get to that in a minute. But he didn't say the angel had, he said he could maybe make out wings or whatever. In my looking at the two interactions he had, the other one, he was outside working on a vehicle. And this was in Hopkinsville at the time. And suddenly this ball of light occurred behind him with a being in it. And the message to him was, you need to move. It's time for you to move and go. And that's when he really moved and started in all this stuff. But they called it an angel. I believe it's the same kind of thing that Native Americans reported. Lots of old reports of having a ball of light with a being in them that has a message for them, a life-altering message. There's all those contactee reports I see a lot of that as a trickster. And as long as Cayce, this gets really complicated, but while Cayce was doing the health readings, he really didn't say anything that I believe was inaccurate. And I know he didn't say anything that hurt anybody. And his health readings took place from roughly the year 1900 to 1923. Those were health readings. And he did about 6,000.
Yeah, he did about
that was during that time period. Then he did 14,300 from 1923 to 1945, because
with no medical background whatsoever.
No, and he didn't have any.
I always felt let's stay here. We're going to get to Atlantis, everybody.
Okay,
but today, that's a lawsuit, right? But back then, without a medical background, doing giving a diagnosis and these health readings, I have read that they were very accurate when he didn't have any knowledge of anatomy or any medical training. Are those rumors true?
Well, all right. So there are I know of 4 studies published in medical journals. The Journal of the American Medical Association actually dubbed Cayce the father of holistic health. And in the 4 studies that I'm aware of, one of them was in JAMA, the Journal of American Medical Association. They all have the same basic percentages. They have analyzed Cayce's health readings. Of course, they have to take a sample because there's like 14,000 where they have all the information. And a lot of the people that had health readings are still alive. I've met some of them. They have come to the ARE and given talks, and a lot of their families are still alive. But anyway, all the percentages run anywhere from 83% to 88%. And that doesn't mean that the other percentage is wrong, because in a lot of cases, they couldn't find out, was he right or not? So 80-some% correct. And that's what caught my attention. I know. That's what caught my attention. And he did these health readings without the people present, nor did they usually even tell them what was wrong with them to begin with.
Yeah, he was like an MRI machine with a pulse.
Yes, there you go.
Yeah, and to be able to do this and to diagnose, and you're right, not every one of these health readings were done in person.
Yeah.
The accuracy that I've read about, especially without a medical background, and if you go back then, medicine was. How do I say this? Antibiotics were new. X-rays were brand new. All of this stuff was, the medical industry was just starting to modernize. Yeah. But yet Cayce was doing these medical readings before all of this modern medicine was around.
Well, one of Cayce's readings said, believe it or not, it said someday everything will be diagnosed with blood tests. Which nobody ever guessed that. I mean, they had no idea that could actually be done. But that was one of his predictions. And he said it won't be that long away till everything is diagnosed with blood tests. So yeah, it's all astonishing. There's a lot more I could say about it, but that's what hooked me. And
so, what was his process? And just for clarification, right, for transparency. Because we all know there is the mythological side, the folklore side of Edgar Cayce, the pop culture side, and then there are the facts. The pop culture side that everybody kind of knows about Edgar was that he would wake up, he would go into these dream states, wake up, and then write everything down, and that was the process. True. Okay, so tell me about his process.
All right, so the process was relatively simple. Cayce would get letters. A letter would come in, and they'd say, "My son, please do a reading on my son and give us advice. He's very ill. We don't know what to do with him. We've taken him to the doctors." Cayce what he got were letters from people who had already been to doctors, and doctors had no idea what was wrong. Now, this is after all the doctors studied Cayce. Now, I haven't gotten into that because they did a lot of stuff. A lot of doctors studied him. That's how he got famous, because doctors published articles about him and gave talks about him, and then newspapers picked up on it. And by the way, Cayce stopped letting the doctors test him when he would go into it. He went into trances, and they would actually stick hat pins through his cheeks from one to the other to see if he was really in a trance. And the final straw was when they took a pair of pliers and pulled fingernails off of him while he was in a psychic trance. And that's when he said, that's it. So how he gave these readings, they would get a letter. He had somebody, usually it was his wife or it was a doctor. There were a couple doctors that did this with him, and they were called the conductor. So they would go to the room. They would have the letter and a list of questions. Cayce would lay down on a couch. He'd take his shoe. He'd untie his shoes. He'd loosen his tie. Everybody wore ties in those days. He'd loosen that. He'd lay back. He'd put his hands over his solar plexus, take a few deep breaths, and close his eyes and go into a self-induced trance. The conductor was supposed to watch him carefully. When his eyes started moving back and forth really quickly, which is called rapid eye movement, they were immediately supposed to tell him, they were supposed to begin asking him questions. That's how it worked. So they went through the questions. A stenographer was in the room and wrote down every word that he said. When it was over, Edgar would say, "We are through for the present." He'd just stop. And the readings told Edgar, don't do more than one of these a day. And that's what killed him. He started doing so many because he got so many letters when he became famous, and he just couldn't turn people down. There were so many sick people. So that was the process.
Right. That's so interesting. And was he able to, I'm going to ask, was this a revenue stream?
All right. Edgar, a lot of people don't know this, but Edgar made maybe like $300 a month from this. They took donations. People would put $5 or $1 or whatever in the envelope, but they didn't have to. He did many, many ones that were free. But Edgar was a professional photographer. He won several awards. That's how he made his living. He was a photographer, and he had photographic studios. Some of his photos are still around, but that's what he did for a living.
Now, did somebody write him asking about Atlantis?
No, that's a separate story. In 1923, everything changed. From 1901 to 1923, all of Cayce's readings were health readings. And he gave the majority of those for doctors. Doctors wanted him to do it. So in 1923, there was a guy by the name of Lammers who got Cayce to go to Dayton, Ohio, and they actually went a few other places. He went to Florida also and that's where the Atlantis readings came out. But anyway, Lammers was interested in esoteric things. Yes, he was interested in Atlantis, although Lammers never brought up Atlantis. He brought up theosophy and other things like that. And Lammers started asking him questions about things. And in 1923, that is when the very first reading that talked about reincarnation came out. And it shocked Edgar when Edgar read the transcripts of that, and his wife saw it and heard it. It mortified him because they were devout Christians. Edgar he memorized the Bible. Edgar actually had a photographic memory who could memorize things. By the way, he was famous before he ever did the psychic readings because he could look through a book and he'd memorize every word of it, could recite it. He had an eidetic memory. Very few people have that, but it does occur. So
that's the turpentine. I'm telling you, it's the turpentine. It's the turpentine.
Well, don't try that at home, folks. I'm gonna do. I mean, that's just one of those weird. Maybe you have to see your grandfather die after it too. Maybe that's
that could be. Well, I've got a nail gun in the garage, and I do have some turpentine. So,
I'm glad to be in your last show.
Yeah. So back to 1923 and theosophy. Right, Atlantis.
How it popped up was this: he was being asked about, is oil on Bimini? That's what he was asked about, oil. And he actually, in the reading, he said there is no oil, but he said there was a gold vein there. And this gets really, the whole story of this gold vein gets really bizarre. But he said there's a gold vein there. And he said there's also gold that's been planted on the island in basically glass jars, like mason jars from a robbery. He said they were there. And he told them where it was. And so they went, the people that got this reading, this was like 1923, people that got this reading went there and they couldn't find it. The gold vein, he talked about being under the water, under the deep sand and under the bedrock. And they came and asked, and he said in the reading, he said, because people's motivations aren't right, that's why you can't find it. And then he said, but this is the highest land of a once great continent, the continent of Poseidia, which is the other word for Atlantis. And they didn't even care about that. That to heck with that. Tell us where the gold is. That's basically what they did. So a little while later, about a year later, more on Atlantis came out, and he talked about a temple of the Poseidians, and that if a survey was made to the south of Bimini following the Gulf Stream, a temple of the Poseidians could be found there. And so the people who were around him started holding readings specifically on a topic such as Atlantis, and that's what they did. So Cayce's story of Atlantis actually begins in around 210,000 BC. He said that a new type of human, now you got to remember, this was in the 1920s. And in the 1920s, modern humans started in around 60,000 years ago. That's what's in the textbooks from the 1920s, that
Right.
modern man didn't begin until 60,000 years ago. Well, Cayce said that the new version of humanity evolved or emerged about 210,000 years ago on Atlantis. And he said there was another older version of humanity, less evolved, that lived in the South Pacific area, in an area he called MU, or Lemuria. That is Cayce's story. But there were people in Lemuria far earlier, but they were much more primitive. But Cayce's story of Atlantis started 210,000 years ago. What it was, according to Cayce, was a massive island empire that began at the Straits of Gibraltar, which was called the Pillars of Hercules, all the way over to the Caribbean. And it included all the islands of the Caribbean. It included what he called British Honduras, and it included what we would today call Belize and the Yucatan and part of Florida. All that was portions of Atlantis, according to Cayce. And it was an island empire, basically what Plato said, an island empire. Of course, everybody thinks Atlantis is that little tiny center city. And Plato made it very, very clear in his readings that the center city, which was a circular formation, was at the southern part in the middle of an island that was 340 miles long and 240 miles wide. That was the main island of Atlantis, according to Plato. Well, Cayce said all the islands in the Caribbean were portions of it. And then in these people started developing in 210,000 BC. They reached the point to where they had basically hot air blimps and dirigibles and so on by the year 50,000 BC. And then a disaster occurred in 50,000 BC, which broke up these islands into 5 major islands. And then in 28,000 BC, according to Cayce, another disaster occurred, and the 5 major islands became a lot of much smaller ones. But there still was pretty much the main island of Atlantis that still existed. And then in 10,000 BC was the main disaster. It was water that swept over the island. He even, in Cayce's readings, he says that there were people in the mountains that watched the waters come over the land. Of course, if you know about a maritime culture, where does everybody live? along the coast.
That's right.
And in 28,000 BC, the sea levels were as much as 600, 700, 800 feet lower. And if you've ever seen the maps of what the Bahamas look like, Bimini was part of the Great Bahama Bank, and it included Andros. It was a gigantic island. And Florida extended out another 50 or 60 miles into the ocean. All around it, it was gigantic. So all of these places were bigger, and they're all underwater. And
now,
that is
what. So you're suggesting when you look at the island chain there, of course, we've got Cuba, right, and Puerto Rico and Haiti, and of course, Grenada, all the way over into the Honduras. There's islands throughout that entire region, all the way back up. But you're saying from there all the way over to Spain and Morocco?
Yep. Keep in mind now that it's an empire, a maritime culture,
right?
A trading culture. So Atlantis controlled all of that, according to Cayce. Now, if you read Plato, Plato wrote this about 355 BC. That Atlantis controlled everything outside of Gibraltar, according to Plato, and he said that by hopping from island to island, you could reach the opposite continent. Which and that is almost an exact quote from Plato's writings, Critias and Timaeus. And he knew there was an opposite continent. So he knew, too, it was an island empire. But when Plato talked about the center city, he said it was on this island, and he gave the dimensions in stades. That's how we know how big the island was. And it fits Cuba. Of course, Andrew Collins, who's been a guest of yours, and Andrew and I have written several books together. I've written introductions to several of his books, too. Andrew believes that Cuba was the main island of Atlantis. And he mentioned in his book, Atlantis in the Caribbean and Gateway to Atlantis, that he believed it was the Isle of Youth. But since those books came out, I think he agrees with me. There is a place in Cuba, in the Zapata Peninsula, where I have been trying to get for years, and Andrew wants to go with us because we've done a lot of exploration, and even at my advanced stage, it's a place I want to go. It's in the Zapata Peninsula. If you get on Google Earth, you can see it. You got to really zoom in. The Zapata Peninsula is to the west of the Bay of Pigs, which you can't go to. But if you go to Zapata, you will see it's in the southern side, the very southern side of the island, exactly as Plato said. There are 2 growing seasons there, exactly as Plato said. And there are mountains to the north, which exactly what Plato said. And there are ancient canals all over there, exactly as Plato said. And there is a large circular area which is submerged. And I have a map that the British made of that circular area. And it actually has concentric rings in it. And it's about the size of the center city. The center city was only 1.5 miles in diameter. That's what people don't know. They're looking for a circular island, but that's not what Plato said Atlantis was.
Yeah, Zapata, that peninsula, it is shaped unnaturally. I mean, if you look at it, and you could go up and down the coast of every continent on planet Earth and not find anything that looks like that.
Yeah. It's covered with ancient canals. They're called Arawak. It's the Arawak. The Arawak culture used them, but it's covered with a mesh of back and forth canals, which is what Plato said. North of the center city, there are canals. Now, you could still see a lot of those canals on Google Earth.
Yeah, you certainly can. And what about the area on the far west side of Cuba, where if we all know the stories, right? Yeah. Okay. So let's address that, because at one point it seemed that the Cuban government was okay with the research and the mapping and filming of that region. And then once the funding started to come through, they backed out, and now nobody can go there.
Yeah.
So what do you think about that?
Well, and Andrew was involved in that from the beginning, and
Yes, he was.
that's when my wife and I were assisting and speaking at the ARE's Ancient Mysteries conference, and I actually talked to them on a satellite. The people on that boat doing the research on a satellite phone, trying to get them to come to Virginia Beach to present, and it really wasn't possible at the time. I said, "Well, we'll do it while you're on the boat. We'll set a video feed up." And so what happened with that? Paulina Zalitsky, I want to call her Zalitsky, but that's not her full name. I'm thinking of Ukraine too much here. But Paulina was her first name, and her husband, they were the researchers. They needed a huge amount of money to renovate the boat. It's in very, very deep water. Andrew looked at their video. I don't know. I know he signed non-disclosure agreements, but I know that a lot of this has already come out. At the end of, I've seen their video now too. I've never signed a non-disclosure agreement. So to me, it looks like dumped concrete. And to me, it looks like concrete. And I've done some real research in this. And when you see people say it's probably where the concrete from the Cuban Missile Crisis silos is, that is the exact location where the Soviet Union dumped all the concrete from the silos that they had to dismantle in Cuba. Honestly, I have got to be completely honest about this stuff. And that's what I think it is. I might be wrong. I have seen their side scan sonar, but what you're looking at with that is the very best picture they have of the very best area. I'd want to see all the rest. We've done side scan sonar off of our own boat in the Bahamas and many places, and you can't take one little area and draw conclusions. You do a swath and you look at that swath. Mm-hmm. So I just think that area is an anomaly, and there's something down there that was dumped. And I know that is the precise location where a huge amount of stand-up concrete, which I know a lot about because of prisons, actually. That's why I know a lot about stand-up concrete. That's what it looks like. Rebar, steel reinforced concrete slabs that are put together very quickly and very, very solid. That's what it looks like. Sorry.
Now, Edgar, this 10,000 BC number, I find very interesting, and it's not just Edgar here, right? 10,000 BC pops up everywhere.
The Younger Dryas event, 9600.
Göbekli Tepe is right.
I'll give you another piece. The oldest known mound in the Americas, the oldest known mound, built in 9300 BC in Louisiana. 9,300 BC. That's incredible if you think about it. And Cayce said that the mounds were built by remnants of the Atlanteans. That the Atlanteans at the time of the destruction. Cayce said they were the red race, by the way, all over the place. The red race. The Atlanteans went and joined with the Iroquois. They became the Iroquois. They went to South America and they went to Central America. And he said they actually became the mound builders in the Americas, and they built the pyramids in South America and Central America. But yes, 9,000, 10,000 BC just is everywhere, everywhere.
It's in the Egyptian builder's text. You know, I think that Plato got so much of his information from his trips to Egypt. And we're talking about he was there at 400 BC, right? 355, 400 BC. Yeah.
360, I think, is when they say he did the books. Go ahead.
That's a friggin' long time ago. So to go into Egypt at 400 BC, when we're talking about when those texts were written and the history of Egypt at that point was 2,500 years old. Plato's closer to us today than he was to the origins, right?
Good point.
Right?
Yeah. Good point. Yeah.
And that number was showing up then in Egyptian history of 10,000 BC, referencing a flood, island falling into the ocean, and our founders, came from elsewhere at about 10,000 BC. It's been repeated over and over again.
It is, absolutely. That date pops up over and over. That date pops up with when Cayce said that, the Hall of Records needed to be made, which you had asked earlier about the UFO stuff or aliens with Cayce. Cayce did, in fact, say that he said there's life all over the universe, that there are beings everywhere, except Cayce was asked specifically about animal life on planets in the solar system. And the question was, is there animal life on any other planet here? And his answer was no. But he said it's all over in other solar systems, but not this one. I find that interesting because all of the contactees, the people that had a flying saucer land in their farmhouse or in the woods behind them, and an alien walks out and says, "I'm from Venus," or "I'm from Mars," or wherever they were from. And I see those as tricksters. They are something quite real, but they're tricksters. And theosophy, what Blavatsky said, what a lot of others said. There are loads of other books from the 1800s, like Theosophy, that talks about other planets being inhabited. Cayce's the only one I know of that said there's no animal life on any planet in our solar system. I don't know anybody else that said that. But he did say that around the time of Christ, there were visitors from other worlds who landed in the Yucatan and interacted. And that was in the 1930s. Nobody then asked him follow-up questions about it, so we don't know. But he did say that. And when the whole idea of the Hall of Records around 10,400 BC is when the priests of Atlantis were told through contact with other worlds that Atlantis was going to be destroyed, that it was coming, and that they needed to make a plan to retain all the information from Atlantis, their technology, their history, and so on, and to put it in 3 places around the world. That was through contact with beings on other worlds too. So those are the 2 places in Cayce's readings where he addressed that.
Now, I want to go back. You know what? I got to get my commercial in. I'm 15 minutes late. So let's get that in. Our guest tonight, Dr. Greg Little, is with us. We're talking Atlantis and Edgar Cayce. Stay with us. We'll be right back. This is Jimmy Church of Fade to Black. Please visit all of our sponsors. We're taking a quick break here. All of the links are below. We'll be right back. Join us November 10th, 11th, and 12th, 2023, live at the Luxor Hotel and Casino on the Las Vegas Strip, as Disclosure Fest Foundation and Fade to Black Radio presents Stairway to the Stars, a Human Origins Science and Technology Expo. With live talks, lectures, and workshops by world-acclaimed researchers and authors featuring topics like human origins, ancient technologies, indigenous teachings, workshops, a mass meditation, yoga and sound healing, music, and so much more. This is Jimmy Church, by the way, and I'll be your host all weekend long. Don't miss our intimate sky watch and meteor shower over the infamous Area 51 airspace in Rachel, Nevada, with special surprise celebrity hosts guiding us through the night. This event will sell out. For more information and tickets, please visit disclosurefest.org. Hi, everybody. Jimmy Church here. Very special announcement, and that is we are shipping Fade to Black t-shirts again. It's been almost 2 years. We did a full upgrade to the website, so you can head over to jimmychurchradio.com. It's all simple to do, and it's right there. Remember, we broadcast 4 nights a week, Monday through Thursday. We bring you the best, the brightest, the most knowledgeable and amazing guests, the best conversations. We do that 4 nights a week. We also do 4 days a week we broadcast the news, and we do that live too as well. It's not a one-man show. I do it with website support. I do it with producers. I do it with writers and artists. All contribute to the show. The best way to help support what we do here is with a Fade to Black t-shirt. And you can get your Fade to Black t-shirt one of two ways. First, go to jimmychurchradio.com, order a shirt. It's really that simple. You're going to get a tracking number, it's going to get shipped, and it's going to get autographed. The second way to get a shirt is with a Game Changer membership. Now, the Game Changer membership not only includes a free t-shirt, but you get a private email to me. You get unlimited commercial-free downloads. You have full access to the website, and everything includes free shipping, and everything is autographed. So help support the show. Get your Fade to Black t-shirt today. The links are below. You can just go to jimmychurchradio.com, and it's right on the website. So there you go. I'm Jimmy Church, Fade to Black. I'm so excited that I just have one thing to say. Go Beckley Teppy. River Moon Coffee, makers of the Fade to Black blend. Truly the best coffee on planet Earth. Just visit rivermoonwellness.com or their Amazon store. It's all simple to do. You can check out the Fade to Black blend, the Game Changer blend, or any of their Black Moon Wellness products. It's the only coffee I drink. It is the best, and it's Doc. Again, rivermoonwellness.com. All right. Welcome back. Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, our guest, Dr. Gregory Little. We're talking about Atlantis and Edgar Cayce and some other subjects, too. We've discussed an awful lot tonight, and it's the first time that Greg's been on with us. And you know the drill when that happens. We talk about everything. Next time Greg is on, we'll just laser focused on one subject, and we'll do it that way. But back to Atlantis. You had mentioned earlier that 20 some odd thousand years ago and so forth, that they had flying machines of some kind. So it was an advanced civilization, but you also said that they weren't as advanced as we are today. Am I paraphrasing this correctly?
Pretty much. Yeah.
It's
not. I take the same track Graham Hancock does. I've said this, and it's in our books, including books we did with the ARE Press, that they had a maritime culture roughly on par with, say, maritime in the early 1800s. Mm-hmm. Sailing ships that were very well made. They were good. By the way, during the Ice Age, sailing was a lot easier. The weather was more stable. The colder the weather is, the more stable the air is. If pilots know that. I have a pilot's license. I used to fly a lot. I don't anymore. But the colder the weather is, the more stable the air is. It's very easy. Even in boats, it's a lot easier in cold weather. But their technology was, the maritime culture was probably sailing ships that were pretty advanced. They had metal. We did, in our research that we did in the Bahamas, we found 31 planes. I want to bring that up real quick. And the reason I want to is because we found planes that had crashed only like 20, 30 years ago. And after 20 or 30 years ago, there's not much left of a plane underwater, not much left of metal. Edgar Cayce, who was Edgar Cayce's youngest son, told me that in an interview that we did with him, which we filmed, he said that an advanced civilization is the easiest one to destroy. And because everything's made of metal and everything is made of material that will degrade. Stone is about the only thing that will last. And Edgar Evans was correct. So whatever they had, I believe it's almost all underwater. There are some places where it's probably not, like in South America, but it's underwater. So the planes, a lot of the planes are just very, very degraded, and almost all the material within the plane was gone, except for U.S. passports. I will tell you this, that a crashed plane that's been in the water for 40, 45 years, if you find a U.S. passport in a passenger's pants, which we did, passport's just fine. Don't have. It's just a little weird thing.
Wait a minute here. You dove and plane crash, and there was a body.
No, there's no body.
Okay, you found
In
the
fact,
pants.
the one that passport came out of, we found the pants, and most of the pockets were fine. I mean, it's just weird. I can't explain it. Maybe it was polyester or something. The pockets were fine. That's where the passport was in a bag, a pilot's bag that was under the seat, and there was actually a shark inside the cockpit of the plane. There was a shark in there. We filmed that. I've shown that film. In fact, Coast to Coast showed that film quite a lot. It was on their website for quite a few years. So, and the weird things that guests put up there.
Sure.
But we found 31 crashed planes. 3 of them were planes that are on the Bermuda Triangle list. We found one of those with National Geographic, and it was a DC-3, a commercial passenger plane that we found. They actually sent the parts to England, and the British Royal Air Force took the parts and matched them up and found out what it was. But yeah, you can find in some of these, if the plane didn't totally disintegrate, you can get things out of them. We got a stack of baby diapers.
Wait. Back to the passport. I gotta ask. So, did you return it to the family? What did you do with it?
No, we.
I mean, there's got to be
okay. There's a story. There's
got to be a story.
The plane that the passport came out of was in the Gulf Stream. It was in about 30 feet of water, middle of nowhere. And the story about it, we found the story in a Florida newspaper. And it so happened, now, if you crash out there, there's no planes, there's no Coast Guard. The Bahamas have nobody that goes and looks for a crash. In fact, we were on Andros once, and the Bahamian Navy called us at a place we were staying and asked if we would get a plane and go look for a crashed plane. And no, we can't. We didn't have a plane. I wouldn't trust any of the planes they had anyway, because there's nobody else to look. And there was a plane that flew, a passenger plane that had like 6 people on it, that flew into the thunderstorm, and it disappeared in the tongue of the ocean, which is very, very deep. And so they needed somebody to go look. And they knew we were there. I wasn't going to do that. So, I mean, it's kind of crazy. But if you crash there's nobody going to come and look for you. There's nothing.
So what happened to the passport?
Okay. I think my wife still has it.
No way.
It's void. The people that were on the plane survived. Unbelievable. There was a commercial plane above them. It was a 2-engine plane that had 4 people on board. 3 of the people, this is why I almost hate telling it, worked in Hooters.
Okay.
3 of the people worked in Hooters.
Okay.
The pilot was flying them back from Puerto Rico. They had gone to Puerto Rico. They were coming back from Puerto Rico. He had engine trouble. This is all in the newspaper article. And the passport was void. They're only good for 10 years. It was totally voided by then. And we tried to find the guy, but we couldn't. He was involved in shady things.
Okay.
I know he got arrested for several things. He crashed another plane on an interstate near Miami. But anyway, the plane flying over them, they radioed a mayday, and they were lucky. A plane flying above them heard it, and the pilot above them told them how to glide into the water. And he then notified the U.S. Coast Guard of a location. And so they triangulate and they decide how far they're going to float in the Gulf Stream, which the Gulf Stream goes 4 to 6 miles an hour, depends on the time of the year. And they were found a day later. All of them, they had one small lifeboat. Two of them could be in it at a time, and they took turns getting in the lifeboat. Quite an interesting
That is
story.
the craziest story. Man, I thought I had a fun life.
We
Man, that
found
is
so
nuts.
much stuff you wouldn't believe it. I mean, all of these planes. There's a train underwater in the Bahamas near Bimini. A train. There are automobiles. There are trucks. There's a Jeep in the middle on the on the Great Bahama Bank. There's lots of ships. We found a lot of ships. We know we found one Spanish galleon. We turned in the location of that. I'm sure it had been looted already. But we found two temples. One of the temple, we found a Greek temple made out of polished white marble. Beautiful. I mean, unbelievable what it looks like. And then we ran down the story to that. It was in the 1800s. A couple that lived in Florida that were wealthy bought a Greek temple, had it dismantled in Greece, and then shipped over to Florida. And on the way over, it hit a hurricane and was blown into this area and sank. And there the temple lies. There is this other temple I told you about that's south of Bimini, made out of polished green schist, which is the same thing the Oracle of Delphi is made out of, by the way.
That is correct.
And it was Microsoft. Microsoft has a very large, they have a foundation that supports archaeological work. And one of their representatives contacted me numerous times about them wanting to get this and create a site where they could put it back together, literally reconstruct it and fix it up. And I told them that it's not possible where it is. And they said, yeah, it is. And no, it's in 20 feet of water. And it's in a very weird spot. In any event, their guy did go down. We gave him the contact. He looked at it, then claimed a archaeological salvage permit with it, which was granted. So no one is allowed to go to that site now and do any kind of work. You can get a film permit, but we're not allowed. We've been not banned. We've been told formally that we can't give anybody the location of that. But you can, of course, if you need a film permit, you can contact their archaeological office, and you have to take one of them with you to go to it now. But there's lots of other stuff there. There are areas where there are buildings there underwater, the building foundations. It's very clear that it's quite old. Archaeologists say, well, we've searched land. There's nothing on the land. And yeah, I can tell them this. When we first went there, we stayed at South Bimini over and over at a 2-story motel that we really liked because the boat we used was right there. Eventually, we took our own boat over. We bought a boat that was made for this and took it over. But we stayed there. And one year, this was about 9 years ago, there was a hurricane that went through, and a wall of water came and pushed that entire hotel into the ocean. The whole hotel, there was nobody in it at the time because they had moved everybody out of South Bimini because they knew there was this wall of water about 20 to 30 feet high going to go across. And it literally pushed it off. There is nothing there now but sand. And that's why there's nothing found in the Bahamas. If you look in textbooks, archaeologists tell you there was nobody there until about 500, the year AD 500. It's because everything it's underwater. It's all underwater.
Can we talk about the Hall of Records for a second?
Sure. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Now, you've mentioned it about a half a dozen times tonight, and I never circled back. My question is this, and then we'll get to what it actually is. But do you think that it's possible that it has been found and it has been suppressed? Or do you think it is still yet to be discovered?
I think it's still yet to be discovered. I heard Zahi Hawass say once in a group I was in Virginia Beach that there were rumors that he had a tunnel going from his office in Cairo to the Hall of Records, and his office and his house had been broken into for people looking for this. for for access to it. But no, I don't think it's been looked at. I don't think it's been found. I think Andrew Collins found one of the ways to get into it.
Yeah,
Wrote,
that video that he made is one. I'm claustrophobic.
Yeah,
I can't watch it.
You talking about the documentary?
Yeah. Oh,
yeah, I made that. I was the producer and made that. I
shut
went
up.
over.
That's one of my favorite.
Absolutely. My wife and I went to England and interviewed everybody that was on it. They're all good friends of ours. And I got Andrew's film for that. And yeah, that was one of my things. I made a series of 7 documentaries called the Forgotten History series. And then I've continued. I made a bunch of shorts after that. But yeah, I made that. I love doing that.
It gave me nightmares.
Oh, really?
It's man, that's the most.
Oh, it is.
It's crazy town, man.
The
crazy town.
The smell that they described, and I only put on the parts of the interview that I could. But when you'd hear them talking about when Andrew and Nigel and Sue talked about being in there and being nauseated by the smell of so much guano. I couldn't put that on the film. See that I've tried to stay low key in a lot of this. I had no idea. I love being in the background of this and putting it out and all that. But I narrate. If you listen to it, you'll hear my voice. I was the narrator and I wrote the script for it and all that.
I had no idea. The most interesting part about obviously the cavern itself, but and that's what the centerpiece of this, but it's Andrew's way of looking at the maps that were drawn by the British, and going back to the bird tombs, right? Mm-hmm. and constantly going back. And the British were already there. They had the dotted outline of something. Andrew was smart. Most people, and this goes back to Edgar Cayce, by the way, there's a direct connection, in my opinion, that most people would give up. I mean, it's interesting and stuff, but to go back to Egypt, to go back to where you've already looked and hadn't found, and they were leaving. They were done. They were done. They were going back home. It's like, man, we're out of time. And then they are exiting the cave and beep.
Yep.
Right. And it's a little hole, right? This big at the back, and they circle back and they go and they discover one of the greatest things in the history of everything.
Amazing discovery.
Greg, they were like 2 steps, literally 2 steps, 2 seconds away of never finding it.
Yeah, it is an astonishing story.
It is.
Our story at Bimini was the same. It was Andrew that got us in to going to Bimini. Andrew, when I first met him at the ARE conference, which I got him to come to, Andrew showed a picture here. I don't know if you'll be able to see it or not. It's this one. This is in a book by Charles Berlitz, and this was a picture taken in 1968 of supposedly a triple ring of stones underwater somewhere near Andros. And Andrew had talked about all these people that went to look at it. And now I was into Indian mounds by that time. I was studying the Cayce Organization, asked my wife and I to do an analysis. And then we wrote a book on what Edgar Cayce said about Indian mounds. 68 of his readings mentioned Indian mounds. That's a whole nother story. We won't go there. But I saw that Andrew do that. And I remember I'm standing in the back, watching all this. And I turned to my wife and said, I've seen that before. I said, I bet we could find that. And she said, really? I said, yeah, let's find that. We'll go to the Bahamas. Nobody has ever found this underwater structure right here. Mm-hmm, let's go find that thing. And that was how we did it. That's what it was. So there was another one called Rybakov's E. Dmitry Rybakov was an oceanographer who found a formation not too far from that near Andros that looked like the cursive letter E, like a small letter E. He could see it from the air, but nobody had ever been able to find it on the water. And I'm thinking, hey, back when they did this in the 70s and 60s, when they saw this, they didn't have GPS. I talked to an archaeologist who had spent $30,000 trying to find this thing. And by getting this giant plane with a bunch of people on it looking down, flying around and around and around Andros looking for it, they couldn't find it. And I asked him, well, have you ever talked to the pilots? No, didn't even know they were around. The pilot that took the picture. First thing we did was find the pilot that took the picture. He was still alive. He was in the ARE. He was a member. His wife was a member. His mother was a member. That's how he got into it. His name was Trig Adams. Lived in Florida. We went and interviewed him. We filmed that interview. Then I said, well, do you know where it was? And he said, yeah. He walked in there, came out, had a pilot's map, put a dot on the exact spot where it is. He said, there were 2 of those circles there. And there were. This book has them in, but nobody talks about the other circle. There were 2 giant circles. And I said, has anybody ever asked you where this was? No. But I had this long list of people that went and looked again and again and again for it, never found it. So I contacted a small charter plane service in Florida, went and talked to the owner, had a 2-engine Norman Islander, which will fly without stalling at 45 miles an hour. You can fly a Norman Islander at 45. Had his own GPS system in it where we could push it and get the GPS. Lots of windows, and a Norman Islander is a high wing plane. So the wings are above you, so you can look down. The wings aren't blocking your view. So we flew up and down and back and forth, found it, found the circle, found the other big circle, and then found about 50 more further up the island.
How big?
The big circle, everybody had said, was 1,000 feet in diameter. The smaller one was supposedly 250 feet in diameter, and it was. And then we got the GPS. We also found the location of Ribicoff's E, but that was further up Andros. Andros is about 104 miles long, and they were about 70 miles apart. The problem is that the formation is on the west coast of Andros, where there's nothing, and nobody goes there. But we finally found a sponge diver that had a boat about the size of a rowboat. We made a film about this too. It was beautiful. Gone over there. We cut through the middle of the island through bights, they're called bights. You can only go through them when it's high tide, because in low tide it's dry, but there's no other way to get there. He took us to them and we found them. And this is, got to be able to get this up so you can see it. These are 2 of the circles down here that we found. This is, I've drawn I've tried to put it's hard for me to, I put an outline on them to match them up. Those are the exact circles. And this was going to be it. That's all we wanted to do. We went back then later and found Ribicoff's E. Ribicoff's E, I will tell you that is turtle grass. There's a small round coral head that for some odd reason had this shape of turtle grass that looked like an E from the air. It was nothing. The circle, this is gonna be mind blowing. You walk up to these things. It's about 5 miles offshore, but you can stand out there. The water is so shallow, no boats can get in there. You have to use a shallow boat. That's why we built a catamaran specifically for this, a high-speed catamaran. But you'd go out there and you'd see these giant dark forms, and they look just like stones, just like stones, but they're sponge. You walk up to these things, and in low tide, the tops of these giant sponge. Remember, I said we got a sponge diver to take us, so he was really excited. One of those sponges would bring him $500 to $1,000. One of these giant ones. Some of them are as big as standing stones, but the whole ring is made out of sponge. So that night when we found, it's weird, just sponge.
My mind is blown.
I
right
know,
now.
I know. I mean, and
It's just
people are like,
crazy.
well, that's we wanted a stone ring, but this is how we got into going into the Bahamas over and over, getting our own boat, our own side scan sonar, and starting to find one thing after another, because it was bizarre. Same thing with Andrew and Sue happened to us. The same thing where they're about to leave, and suddenly, oh my God, there's something. There it is. To them, it was the most incredible discovery.
Well, see, here's the thing with that, though. So here you have Edgar talking about, the Hall of Records under I believe, in the left paw of the Sphinx. Zahi Hawass says, there's nothing underneath the Great Pyramid. There's nothing to see here. Andrew Collins spends 2 trips to over 2 years, going back to the Giza Plateau, feeling it in his bones, right? He knew it was there. It turns out that it not only is there stuff underneath the Great Pyramid, there is a lot underneath the Great Pyramid.
Absolutely.
And the British knew about it and mapped it in 1817.
Yeah.
So then what is after the deny? Now, look, I'm not talking bad about Zahi. I'm just stating the facts here. He said nothing. There's nothing here. There's nothing here. There's nothing here. He was in denial about all of it. After you released, Andrew, then the documentary comes out. What does Zahi do? He goes back to the caverns, does his own documentary, and acts like he's discovered something.
Yep.
When it was Andrew Collins that made the discovery. And I will always give Andrew the credit for that. I would never, ever, I'm saying never say never. No, I'm saying I would never have the courage that those 3 did to go into a cave like that, not knowing what is in front of you.
Well, the first time they did it, they only had tiny little flashlights too. They went, and this thing is gigantic, and they're we're walking through the dark. We don't know if there's a hole that we're going to fall.
You don't know what's on the walls, man. Bugs, insects, poisonous spiders, snakes, bats, whatever. How about ghosts? Whatever,
absolutely.
And they had no idea, and they went until they ran out of energy. That last little crevice when they were directly underneath the Great Pyramid, and they turned around, right? They couldn't go any further, and it was like this one
tiny little tube.
Oh man, with the yellow spiders, dude, what are you doing?
Well, it's quite a story. Well, all right, I'll finish the little part of this. So we went, found the sponge, we did the E. And that was it. We were getting ready. I had a plane scheduled to come pick us up, take us back. There was a violent thunderstorm. And that night, a guy came to our door who had been a former dive operator there. And he was convinced we were looking for treasure, because everybody is. And we kept telling people, we're not after treasure. I don't want it. I don't need treasure. That's not what I'm here for. And I showed him the books we had, the photographs, a file with all the GPS coordinates. And he said, well, you need to just go out. And he told me this place, go to this beach. And he said, just go straight out. And he said, there's a formation out there that looks like the Bimini Road, but it's bigger.
Wow.
Said, really? And he said, yeah, this was on North Andros we were at. Night before we left. So the next morning, 6 o'clock the next morning, my wife and I walked from the little motel we were in North Andros, went up there. I snorkeled out, which was stupid. Didn't find anything. And then I moved a little bit to a different area, snorkeled straight out, not knowing what in the world I was doing. And I had just gotten my scuba certification right before this. I don't like swimming. I don't like scuba diving. I really don't. But I do it. But anyway, look at what the heck is this thing? So we filmed a lot of that. We went and we realized we got to go back. I took some pictures. At that time, we had cameras that underwater cameras, cheap ones. You had to click, and you'd move the film, and they were single shot or single use cameras. So we got that developed, and you could see these stone blocks, and they were gigantic, and there were loads and loads of them. And that's what started it. I had no intention to go to Bimini. I said over and over, I'm not going to Bimini. But then when we found this structure called the Andros Platform, which is just a phenomenal thing, and it made national news. And that's when the people over at NASA contacted us that, hey, let's tie this thing together. I decided we had to go look at Bimini, and that's how I got involved in it. And then we got hooked, got our own boat then, and started going back over and over and over. We spent 25 weeks in the Bahamas searching with side scan sonar and underwater video, underwater cameras, all kinds of stuff. We did aerial surveys. We found over 100 spots that we went and looked at with these aerial surveys. That's how we found the 31 planes. I don't know how many ships, because those we could never identify what they were. Probably a dozen ships. And then we found all these other things: the train, the cars, the
planes, trains, and automobiles,
the Jeeps, trucks.
Man.
Yeah, stuff everywhere.
Now, I have, in our limited time that we have left, let's go over a couple of things. There are a lot of researchers that have been looking for Atlantis, and we've got it in the Southern Indian Ocean. We've got it in the Pacific. We've got it in different parts of the Atlantic Ocean, different sizes, all the way over into the Mediterranean and possibly, south of Greece and so forth. So we've got all of that out in front of us. Before I ask you what's your best guess, because you've laid out a pretty good case here for the Caribbean and heading over to Gibraltar, but I'm thinking Antarctica, and I have my own reasons for that. But what do you make of that kind of idea? An ancient civilization pushing back that far, and that Antarctica may not have been where it is now back then, and so forth. Do you think that there's something underneath the ice in Antarctica?
It is very, very possible. Beyond that, I assume that when it was ice free, it was inhabited. I think everywhere was inhabited. We know there were people in South America in 50,000 BC, and we know where they came from. They came from the South Pacific. That Edgar Cayce actually said that in the 1930s. But we know that through genetics now, and we know that through mainstream archaeology. There were people that migrated into South America, and probably well before that. There are sites in the Americas. The U.S. Geological Survey did some of the research in Mexico, sites that go back to 250,000 years ago. You don't hear that from mainstream archaeologists because they would get laughed out of the room, and they have denied it. But if you read textbooks from South and Central America, they talk about it and act as if it's proven. But you just don't hear about it up here. There's a big difference between North American archaeologists and those in the South. So Antarctica, absolutely. In a book Andrew and I did, we even showed how the southern route, which if you simply, during the last ice age, if you had put a boat, and before it, if you had dropped a raft off of what was New Zealand or Australia or any of those islands around there, you would have floated right along the coast of Antarctica, and you would have gone right up the coast of South America and Chile. Absolutely. It wouldn't have taken you that long either. Could you have survived? Sure. Rain, fish, carry food? Absolutely. And you'd probably stop along the way in Antarctica. And so we know that that's the way the water was flowing. That's the way the water movement was and the currents. So I'm sure Antarctica was inhabited. I believe I think there were maritime cultures everywhere around the world. I think Plato knew of the one that came into the Mediterranean and traded there. That's what he knew about. The ones that were, say, around India and China and in the South Pacific, Plato would have known less about, because I think they would have stayed in their basic geographic area, although there was definitely some other movement. And I would, of course, there's no way to prove it, but I would bet money that the whole earth had a maritime culture, and it's been destroyed many times over. In fact, that is what Plato said. Plato said there were movements in the heavens that frequently destroyed civilizations on earth. He said that, and he talked about the most recent one, and that was Atlantis. That is in Timaeus and Critias.
Yes, that's right. And the climate change, it doesn't matter what your view of it is, but what we do know is that we've had 5 or 6 brutal changes on this planet over the last 4 billion years, all before electricity, right? All before the combustion engine and aerosol. So whatever, I'm not a denier or whatever. Climate change is just is also natural. But one thing that climate change is going to do, if things keep moving in the direction that they are, is the ice is going to melt in Antarctica. And whatever it is down there that they don't want us to know about is going to be in plain view.
Yeah.
And eventually that is one of the benefits of climate change is we may see 100 million year old city that was frozen in time.
Very possible. I do, but like I say, I believe there's something there. I don't know what it is. I have no idea. And I'm willing to speculate sometimes, but I really try to stick with the facts. It's like what we find, what we see. But I'm sure there was something there. And I will say this too about climate change. The earth has been getting warmer for the past 20-some thousand years. The ice age didn't end suddenly in 10,000 BC. It started getting warmer starting around 28,000 years ago. That's when it reached its height. And so it's been getting progressively warmer since then.
The Younger Dryas, I mean,
sped it up.
Yeah. Well, it could be, there could be a cosmic influence there. I think that there is a lot of evidence for that. But it happened. Yeah. The point is, we clearly went through that. So the second part of my question, before we wrap tonight, is what's your best guess, though? We've got all of these different locations around the world. Were there multiple Atlantises?
Well, there were multiple islands. I think the center city, which is what everybody looks for, which is that 1.5 mile wide, set of 3 concentric rings of canals and so on with
harbors.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think that was in Cuba. I really do. It's just Cuba fits it to a T. It is the right size. The island was the right size. It has the mountains in the north. It has the ancient canals. It does have the circular formation that is now underwater, and it was not underwater during the last ice age. I think Cuba was the main island, yes. And I think the Bahamas were, I think what we're looking at, Bimini, like I said, that there is at the 110-foot level, which is where the 10,000 BC shoreline is, there are these structures. I think that was a port. I think it was a place where cargo was moved. There is an identical one of those now at the place we found in Andros. I think the place at Andros was also a port at the time. And there is another site that is to the northwest of Cuba called Cayce. We have been there. We did a 2-hour documentary with NBC going to Cayce. And there's an identical one there. And the one at Cayce actually has square stone blocks that are 5-6 feet wide, 2 to 3 feet thick, literally stacked on top of each other. Literally stacked. And it looks like a breakwater, like enclosing a harbor. And Cayce is roughly 30 miles from Cuba. And that's all in Cuban. It's not in Cuban water. Cayce is the southernmost island of the Bahamas. It is owned by the Bahamas, but it's illegal to fly there because it's in Cuban airspace. Of course, it was illegal for us to fly to southern Andros too. But the pilot that I got and his plane was very willing to do it. The Cubans were still shooting planes down in the 1970s, by the way.
Very interesting conversation tonight, Greg. Just absolutely remarkable. I've got a couple of websites up for you, apmagazine.info and edgarcayce.org. Where can everybody reach out to you? And you've got a lot of books published. Where can we chase those down?
Okay. Very best thing to do is to just Google me. but put my middle initial in. If you Google in Greg Little, you'll find a football player. We all know
Yeah,
football
we
players.
all know Greg Little. Yeah.
Yeah, football players matter. There's a couple Greg Little football players now, by the way, so they're always first. But if you Google my full name, Gregory, and put my middle initial, L, Gregory L. Little, there's a Gregory Little that was the tobacco company's main attorney too, which is kind of cool. But anyway, Gregory L. Little, I'll pop up right there. My Vita is there too. It'll be in that first page. There'll be a listing of books, but mainly I'm on Twitter. You can find me on Facebook, but I pretty much have a locked Facebook account. But I'm on Twitter. It's just put my full name in, Gregory L. Little, and I think my Twitter account's the first thing you'll see. And I do answer people on Twitter. I do interact there. I like Twitter a great deal. But only thing I post about there is archaeology and Indian mounds. That's it. Nothing else.
Thank you so much, my friend. What a great conversation. And I look forward to the next time that you're on. It's just like we'll just pick a subject and run with it.
Been a pleasure, man. I appreciate it too. Take care.
Say hello to everybody back in Memphis for me,
I
man.
will.
Music
And I'll
City.
see Andrew soon. I'll tell him hello for you.
Man, I miss that guy. Yeah. You know what? Nobody has an accent like Andrew Collins. I can listen to that guy. Oh, yeah, I
know.
Oh man, I'll talk
Andrew
to you.
Andrew will be with us in here in October. And right now he's in Göbekli Tepe. He left for Göbekli Tepe today.
That's my next this year I'm all booked up for travel. Next year I'm going to Göbekli Tepe. That's it. I'm just going to get that out of the way.
Yeah.
That's the game changer.
Yep.
And maybe we'll do a show on that too as well.
All right.
So
Take care.
give my best to Andrew and be safe out there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Dr. Gregory Little. That was an amazing show. You know what? I said it earlier at the start of the show that tonight was going to be amazing. And then I think in parentheses right after that, I say that about every show. Well, it's true, right? This is why I do this. That was an amazing conversation. And wow. After somebody, before I get out of here, I was over speaking with somebody in the UK in Manchester, and they asked me, what's the deal? What have you learned? I said, after all of these shows, I've changed. You can't help but absorb knowledge, and that's what I do. I'm having conversations like I did tonight with Dr. Little, and I learn. And here's the other thing: I just spent 2-3 hours of not being on my phone. All right, just try doing that. And that's what I've done over the last 10 years is just sit and talk with somebody every single night. Just sit and talk. Try it. All right. Great show tonight. Thank you so much, Greg. That was amazing. Tomorrow night, we've got Pat O'Connell on with us, and we are going to talk. You're not going to want to miss this show either. We're going to talk about the amazing case of Clay Wheeler. And Clay, it involves, if you're not familiar with the case, you can go look it up tonight. It involves an airport. It involves ET, flying saucers, demons, and the paranormal. And this went on for years. It's an amazing case. That's tomorrow night's show, and I will see everybody right here. Thank you so much. Great show tonight. I'm going to get out of here, and everybody have a great, safe, fun, and amazing night. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. This is Fade to Black. Fade to Black is produced by Hilton J. Palm, Renee Newman, and Michelle Freed. Thank you to Dennis and Kevin, webmasters Drew the Geek, music Doug Aldrich, intro Spaceboy, spaceboymusic.com. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network. And this broadcast is owned and copyrighted 2023 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network, Inc. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black or the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. I'll see everybody tomorrow night with Pat O'Connell. Until then, be safe. Go Göbekli Tepe.